Welcome, everybody, to Practical Psychology Podcast, episode 24. I'm Joseph Wong, one of the co hosts. Today, we're very happy to have Brittney Larsen from beautiful Nelson, BC. Brittney is a BC based mental health counselor. She already been here for one session already, talking about this enfranchised grief, neurodivergence. And today we want to invite her again to talk more about neurodivergence, which is her expertise. Thank you, Brittney.
Thanks for having me, Joseph.
Brittney, we know recently you have been running a seminars for a few weeks. Tell us more about that neurodivergence seminars.
Yeah, so this was my first foray into running a group for a counseling group. And I wasn't sure what the turnout would be. So I opened it up to professionals, caregivers, and parents who are supporting neurodivergent children or children that they suspect may be neurodivergent. Yeah, and it went quite well. Um, It was a successful group, and the feedback at the end was that it was people didn't quite realize how much they needed that connection and support in that area.
Yeah. And Brittany, we know you do it as a mental health counselor,
Mhm.
and you also go through it as yourself, being a parent, a caregiver, and you also support a lot of other parents and caregivers in the neurodivergence journey, getting the assessment, diagnosis, registering with the government for the funding in different provincial level here. How about you tell us a little bit about what are the topics that you go through in week one of the group or seminar?
Yeah. And thank you for that. Yeah, exactly. Because and before becoming a counselor, I was a teacher as well. So I kind of saw it from that systemic side, which I'm mentioning because it'll come up in the future in our conversation. So the first session, we focused on locating ourselves within the work. So sort of as our personal identities, our professional identities, and our relational identities. So personal is like as our own individual identity, and then there's
Yeah.
the professional, so the people who are supporting, but also that extends to parents as well because they are advocating for their children within different systems. And then the relational identities is how we're interacting with the neurodivergent children. So we just started with conversation on how neurodivergence entered each of our lives. And then kind of moved on to naming the hopes and the fatigue and what participants needed from the group. So the first week of a group is more figuring out what everyone's looking for.
Oh, I see. Okay. You talk about the personal, the relational level here. Let's say if I'm in group week one and
Mhm.
I'm the participant, what did I go through first at the beginning?
Yes, so we had introductions with each other, and then we also discovered sort of we talk about intersectionality as part of our cultural identities, but also it can extend to our relational identities as well. So what ended up happening was we had some people who were just parents and some people who were just professionals, but the majority of participants were both professionals and counselors working with people who are neurodivergent, and a wide range of professional backgrounds as well within the system.
So, Britt, can you explain a little bit about that word intersectionality? Because a lot of viewers might not know if they are not in the professional mental health field.
Yes, that's a great point. So it would be easy for me to use myself as an example. So that's what I'll do. So for example, I have a bunch of intersectionalities in that I am a person who is white. I am a female. I'm a cisgendered female, which means I was born a female and still identify that way. I am let's see what else. I grew up in a rural community, and that influences how I approach things. Sort of my socioeconomic background will influence how I see the world and interpret the world and move through the world. And so each person has all these intersectionalities, which is where each thing sort of crosses over each other. And so it basically means that each person on this planet is completely unique because all of us have different
Mm.
intersectionalities. And culture we often think of as sort of what people look like and where their families come from historically. But it's much more complicated than that because two people who look alike did not have the same experience, even if they grew up in the same family.
So
And so
in a way,
this
this term is to a down to earth term is different people have sort of the different recipes, different ingredients.
Yeah, exactly. We all have different ingredients that are the makeup of who we are and sort of that. And we also have different personalities as well, because as we know, we're all born kind of with a little bit of that inside ourselves. There's debate on how much is, nature versus nurture. It's the ongoing conversation, but in our field. Um, but that also extends so that the intersectionality of our like relationships with other people. So, say in my case, my professional identities I used to work as an outreach worker at an acute care facility for people who were not ill enough to be in the hospital, but were not well enough to be at home. And then I moved into becoming a teacher. I largely taught at the elementary school level, but also high school as well. And then I became a counselor. So I have a lot of things professionally that even intersect and kind of build on my knowledge and my skill and my expertise. And at the same time, I'm also a parent to two very differently neurodivergent children. And so I have that experience as well, both yeah, at my home and as well as navigating the systems that are a part of every aspect of life.
Brittany here, because you mentioned about different people come with the different intersectionalities, all these integrations and combinations here. What are some of the things they have to be mindful when, for example, in the school system, things are more uniform in nature.
Yes. So, what we notice early on for neurodivergent children is that the classroom environment is often very challenging. It'll be different for each kid because, again, they have different personalities. They're as unique as any other population of people. Um, and so, but it might look like an inability to concentrate and that may lead to disruptive behavior because they're frustrated or they really really want to be doing what they're asked but it's just not something that they're capable of at this time. And so it's really easy depending on our understandings and our backgrounds to just see the behavior. So, and the behaviors are very challenging. And so that's where, or they can be. And largely it's challenging because in the classroom setting, it's often one teacher and 25 children. So expecting them to be able to support a child who needs more one-on-one support is quite an ask because then they would have to be doing that for all 25 children because they all have unique recipes that have made up who they are and each kid has different needs. So in teaching, we call that individualized learning. So we're trying
Mm.
to teach to each kid's like the way that they learn and the way they absorb information. But if you have a neurodivergent kid who doesn't fit into sort of the more standard ways of teaching, it can be really tricky to even have the time to figure out what their specific needs are. And this can lead to either an escalation in behavior or challenges in social situations, but it can also lead to kids shutting down and not asking for help. So there's also the kids that sort of blend into the background, who've learned that it's not safe to express themselves outwardly, but they're still holding it inwardly.
I see. Okay, Brittany. So we will get to that a little bit later.
Yeah.
And so in the group here, the first thing you discuss about is the intersectionality here, and you mentioned about the overlapping of roles here. How
Yeah.
did this deal to the participants or individuals?
Yeah, so this made for a really great group dynamic because we have such different ways that we've come to be in the group, but it's also a place where there's a lot less explanation that needs to happen because people, especially as the people who are professionals and parents, there's so much just unwritten understanding of what that experience is like. Um, so in week 2, we moved into working with living with the both and. So holding like the immense amount of love that you have for your child and the complete exhaustion that happens at the exact same time because your kid has extra needs, or sort of feeling pretty competent, but also holding doubt at the same time is a really big feeling. And so we also had parents who were parents of young kids, like kids who aren't even in school yet or in elementary age. And then we also had parents whose kids were teenagers and young adults, and the different ages that they received diagnosis. And there's so many different factors that different people brought to our group that really gave like a holistic understanding of what this experience can be like, and sort of the similar through lines that everyone has connecting us all, but how vastly different each experience will be because each kid is different, each parent is different, each family system they're in is different, each community that they're in is different because we were across Canada. So there's just so many differences, but with that connective tissue that we all innately understand from our experiences.
Also, pretty. How about talking about some of the people in the group here? They might be both professional and a parent of a neurodivergent child or children.
Mhm.
And how do they negotiate both roles? And what are some of the interesting facts about it?
Yes. So sort of that because when you're a professional and you're working with other people's children, it's easier to be more objective and see behaviors or see patterns that it's harder to see when you're living it day to day with your own child. It's not possible to be objective with people you love. And that's why, as counselors, we can't treat people we're related to or even people we know. It's, yeah, the dual relationship is not advised because you can't be objective. So you're not able to look at the data in the same way that you would as more of a subjective observer. Or sorry,
Mhm.
objective observer.
Oh, yeah. So, Buddy, you mentioned some of the advantages of the overlap of the role. When professionals doing counseling, they make them more objective when in the home life to manage the children. How
Yeah.
about some of the negatives of the overlap of roles?
Yes. So, to keep the confidentiality for my participants, I'll speak about myself. But one of the things is that I hold myself to a very high standard as a parent, which it's impossible to live up to. I'm a human who has a nervous system that gets overwhelmed. One of my children is autistic, and so there's stimming behavior, which in his case is quite auditory. But over time, I can find that really challenging, and I don't respond in the way that I would expect myself to because listening to a repetitive noise for many hours is not something that my nervous system has ever been used to. I grew up in a more quiet household unless we were outside and on adventures. So it's just different from what my nervous system is used to. Some other people can handle auditory sounds easier because they're used to a very loud household growing up. So they're like the baseline for their nervous system can interpret that in information fine, but they might have more challenges with kids who are jumping and smashing into things for that deep pressure that they're seeking. And it can be seen as bad behavior, but if you're a professional, in theory, you know the difference, but in the moment, it's much harder
Mhm.
to separate you as a parent from you as a someone who has the information and the understanding of what's going on here.
Okay, so at that moment it will be quite tough with the extra pressure.
Yes, so because sound over time can be draining for me. What I've started doing is if my kid's having a harder day and he's soothing himself, I wear headphones. So then I can adapt to his need, and he's at home. He's not hurting anyone. He's not distracting anyone. It's the perfect situation for him to be his full unmasked self. So what I have done is adapt for me so that I, as the parent and someone with that understanding, can cope better and then support him better. And he doesn't internalize shame. Not that I
Mm.
would do that, but when someone's reacting negatively to something we're doing, we just, as humans, we feel shame, especially as kids who think everything is their fault, even things that have nothing to do with them.
Yeah. Okay, so Brittany, in week number one, let's say if I'm a participant, I'll be kind of analyzing my intersectionalities to look
Mhm.
at all these roles that I have in my life and how they interact with the final product with the neurodivergence.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, and then from there we were moving into, as I mentioned, the both and thinking. So holding two things at the same time. Because in
Mm.
life we tend to lean into, especially when overwhelmed or stressed, we lean into it's either this or that. There's only two options and they're usually quite extreme, and we forget everything in the middle. So we kind of we're working on moving away from that polarized thinking towards allowing things like the secondary grief to exist alongside the openness to the experience you are having. So, say when you have a kid, a baby, and you're not, you kind of have these expectations for how parenthood might look. And in time, as those things shift and you realize, oh, this is a different situation, there will be processes of grief, but it's grief of the what you had pictured and then an openness for what actually is. And so we kind of think it's either or. Like if I feel grief, then somehow I love my child less. But that's not what's happening. It's that it's both at the same time. You kind of pictured one thing, you're grieving and letting go of that idea while also being open and accepting to the reality and the kid that you do have.
Okay, so Brittany, this is a big concept here about these both ends, the polarized. On one hand, it looks like everybody come into parenting with an expectation that they
Mhm.
learn from somewhere, and then the reality here. So they try to hold on to the both end has a lot of internal conflict.
Exactly. And this is something that all parents experience because, as we've said, kids come out with their own personality and the recipe that is being followed. So it's a thing that everyone experiences. But when you have a neurodivergent child with extra needs, it can be heightened, the experience.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because on one hand here they have a set expectation, and then the reality with all these different internet intersectionalities can change it very different. And they have to adjust this slowly with the grieving and all that. And when they grieve, they think they're doing something wrong.
Yes. And so for parents, that's such a big piece for all parents is you're
Yeah.
born with this person, or sorry, you give birth to this person, or you are raising this person who you want to be the best parent for them that you can be. And even when parents are like leaning on things they learned in their childhood, like yelling at their child or shutting down and sort of withholding love from them, it's because they're trying to teach their child a lesson because they're afraid of what might happen if their child doesn't learn that lesson early on. So it's almost like you're trying to shape and mold your child so that they don't experience harm, basically, is the big picture. So it comes from a place of fear and love. So again, the both and. But the behaviors that the parents do are usually those kind that I mentioned are not effective and they're actually going to make children's behavior worse. But the desire is to help our kids, even if we're not doing it in a way that's achieving that goal.
Yeah, it's very interesting here, Brittany, because you mentioned about the term best parent. Obviously, some parents will say it that way, some parents might not say it that way, but we all have this idea of being the best parent for the
Yes.
children.
And sort of like your children's behavior is then a reflection of who you are as a parent, which is not
Yes.
necessarily true. It can be true, but it's not necessarily true. And usually, I mean, the parents I have met as a counselor and as a human being, everyone is trying their best to give their
Yeah.
kids the best shot they can.
Let's focus a little bit on that because when when the parents is trying to adjust both ends here and kind of like dismantling the best parent view here, it causes a lot of internal distress.
It does, absolutely. And it can be things like guilt or even things like hope can cause distress in that area.
Yeah.
Like if you, as a parent, had this dream, you saw that when your kid was a preschooler, they were really good at this one thing. So you tried to help support it. And now it's kind of more your dream that they achieve this thing than necessarily even theirs. But the intention is that you're helping,
Yeah.
but yeah, so even hope can be sort of like put way too high of expectations on parents and then subsequently on their kids.
And Brit, you work as a professional, you work as a teacher, you know a lot of parents here. Tell us more about it because there's a big social pressure.
There is.
For
And
example, if a child misbehave, the other people will think, oh, what's wrong with the parent?
yes. And so this part of the parenting journey was a big factor for me early on, especially before I knew that my kids were neurodivergent. My oldest, I remember going to the playground with friends when he was like 2 years old, and all the other kids were engaging with their parents and playing on the playground. And mine, I would set him down and he would just try to run away. And but it was an autistic response where it's this drive to run. And so that is something, I mean, we can get into that, like different symptoms at a later time, but that was something that I saw as such a failure of my own because my kid didn't want to play with me. But that's not what was happening. He just needed me to play with him in his way. And he felt really safe because he knew I'd always be there when he turned around, even when that was challenging for me as a parent, if he would like dart away from me. And this is a kid who's 2. I mean, he's just running on instincts at that point.
Yeah. And
And this
and
is
what type of social pressure you feel as a parent?
So there was a lot of pieces. There was the judgment from other people, which some of that was imagined by myself, just more
Okay,
embarrassment.
yeah.
And some of it was from comments and usually well-meaning comments, but it
Uh,
sort of was like that person doesn't have control of their child. Um, and so then I felt pressure to prove that I did, which of course is a bit silly. So I'm trying to like appease societal expectations, but I've internalized them myself. So in my mind, it's like if my kid doesn't want to play with me, that says something about me. It says that my kid is not well
mm,
attached to me. I like had this long list of what we call mom guilt, but it's
okay,
parental guilt. It's
yeah.
everyone. Where I just was like looking for all the things I was doing wrong and trying to fix them because we have this sort of solution focused and like cure based thinking that's so ingrained. Like the goal is that all children in the end up as this like one homogenous adult figure, like
Yeah.
like this like best case scenario, which of course no one actually ends up becoming. But when we start out, there's so many shoulds, and those shoulds are just in there deeply that
Mm,
we've learned through the recipe of our own intersectionality over time, depending on what the expectations are culturally, and within your family system culturally as well. And the guilt is really insidious. And it was hard for me to even notice or name at first because it felt like a fact. it was my perception of the
Oh,
situation that I was failing, but it felt like a fact, even though almost everyone around me was saying what a great job
mm.
I was doing as a parent. So it was coming from within me, but based on these external expectations I had absorbed unconsciously throughout my life.
Oh, yeah. From what you're mentioning, I can imagine for a lot of parents, it will be very triggering because the other parents may say, "Hey, your child is running," and I mean with good intentions to remind, but this reminder must be very triggering, especially for
Yeah,
different parents with different intersectionality. They might have some anxiety tendency, or they might be just burnt out and stressed, and very
yeah,
easy to spiral from that
it is.
trigger.
Well, and you're like at the same time that this is all happening, you're keeping a tiny human alive. And that is so challenging, especially for the first like 5 years of their lives, because they don't have that impulse control until about age 7, where they can stop themselves. So it's sort of, we have these expectations for little kids that just are not possible developmentally, but we have these really high expectations of them, which sets them up for failure and it sets us up for failure. And interestingly, I know that like the people I was spending time with during that phase of my life were having different challenges with their kids, and never once did I think they were doing something inappropriate. So again, it's a lot just coming from the inside because your nervous system is completely overwhelmed, especially
Yeah.
as a new parent when you haven't done it before.
So Brittany, here you mentioned about some of this internalized perception from other people's reminders or triggers can become so real as almost a facts, And doing for parents, what are some of the check and balance or some of the protective factor to kind of counter this?
Yes. So one of the things that I lean into is sort of a proactive attunement to my kids' needs
Okay.
instead of like reactive intervention when something doesn't go according to plan. Because often
Oh,
if you pay attention and are learning sort of to become attuned, means sort of like aware of your kids' needs and their behaviors, really
oh,
connection with them. You can set things in place to, to set yourself up for success and to set them up for success ahead of time instead of trying to ration with the child in the moment. Because, first of all, they're not rational. And second of all, you won't be rational either because you are either feeling judged if you're in a public place, or your nervous system is overwhelmed, or there's so many things that can be happening for you as well. So if you sort of are proactive in setting people up for success, it can be really great, especially if your kid has sensory needs. You can kind of do some things before you leave the house that will make it a better experience. It depends on the kid, so it's hard for me to give examples, but um, there's so many ways that can become attuned, and
oh.
then if something goes awry, you can repair without requiring that perfection from yourself. So um yelling was not how I wanted to respond to this situation. Let's try again. So you're modeling to your kid, like, I didn't want to react like that, which is often how they feel. Um, and and then you're also repairing it by saying, yeah, I didn't want to do that. I'm really sorry. Let's try again. And let's try again is that letting go of perfection that so many of us carry across our lives, which can be helpful, but it can also be harmful as well with those
Mm.
expectations that we internalize. I'm
Yeah,
not
and
totally
Brittany,
sure. I went a little off track, so I'm not sure if I answered your question or not.
it's good here because Brittany, you mentioned about attunement, attune to the needs of the child here. You mentioned about the two examples being proactive and reactive here to try to engage you better here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can
Yeah.
you give us some of the reactive examples that uh parents might do?
Yeah. So before I mentioned sort of either yelling or shutting down.
Okay.
Those are two reactive responses to something that's happening.
Okay.
Um, and they usually come because you haven't prepared yourself for how to deal with this situation. And in
Mm,
most cases, it's hard to prepare for things you don't know what's going to happen anyway. So by being proactive, you're sort of thinking, okay, when we go out in public, this is a common one for parents. It's like it's easier to manage at home, but when you're out in
mhm,
public, because there's other people to witness, it feels harder to
mhm,
keep your cool and you feel that pressure to sort of prove that you're a good parent. So, even if that's not consciously what you're thinking, usually that's not what you're consciously thinking, but it's in there. So being proactive would be like, say your kid has a hard time calmly entering a situation. If they have a hard time with transitions, which is really common for all kids, but especially neurodivergent kids, transitioning from one activity to another is really tough, especially if it's a kid who really needs to finish something before moving on. So if you know they're going to get wild and silly, you create strategies to get the silliness out before you
mm,
leave the house. So instead of resisting the behavior you know is going to happen anyway, you sort of lean
mm,
into it, but ahead of time to sort of release the tension from your child's body. And I'm
mm.
explaining this in a really simplistic way right now, but yeah, there's other conversations we could have that go deeper into it, but just so we don't overwhelm people, I'll leave it at that level.
So in a way here, it looks like a proactive is you already kind of learn from the previous examples, so you
Mhm.
kind of have a game plan,
Yeah, and
have
that's
some
where
sort of
the
visualization rather than just go in and wing it impromptu.
exactly. It's like,
Okay.
yeah, learning from your past experiences, becoming
Right.
attuned with
Yeah.
what's likely to happen, or even your kids' sort of energy level or mood that day, and knowing and coming up with strategies that work for your
Mm,
particular child to sort of proactively prepare them for success and prepare yourself for success when it's not
mm.
possible. Because, like with toddlers and preschoolers, it's pretty hard to prepare them for success, but it's easier to prepare yourself.
How about Brittany for parents or individuals? Every single day they are like treading waters already. They have
Yes.
no they have no capacity to think about the past to develop a game plan. They just have to wing it. So how about those individuals?
Yes, so I have been that individual. Um, because as I mentioned, my younger son is also neurodivergent, but in a really different way. So sometimes they can complement each other, and sometimes
Okay.
their behaviors can feed off of each other. So there's a lot of that treading water. And so I think one of the best things to do is reduce some demands from yourself. So these sort of expectations that I need to take my kids to all of the activities because if they aren't exposed to them young, they'll never be interested in anything. But often parents they're going to the activities so they can see other parents, which is great, and to connect with the community. It's fantastic, but also it's worth it to take stock of what your kid is up for, what you're capable of that day, what they're capable of that day, because of course, each day is totally different. I have some days where my kids are like the easiest children on the planet. And then I have some days where leaving the house feels almost impossible because they're really dysregulated, or one of them is. It's really tricky when in that treading water state to sort of take a moment, take a step back and reflect on like what your values are and why you're putting pressure on yourself in different ways. Um, so in working with parents of neurodivergent kids, what I often focus on is finding ways to engage in self-care for themselves. Because as a caregiver or a parent or even a professional working in a professional setting with neurodivergent people day in and day out, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of other people. And so often we think the child's behavior is theirs alone, but there's often things that we're doing that's escalating it and feeding into things. So kind of having that awareness of yourself. It seems like self-care. I don't mean like having a bubble bath. I mean, that's fantastic if that's something that works for you, but we have lots of areas of wellness. Um,
Mhm.
like for myself, I actually feel the most energized and at my best capacity when I've learned something, like when I'm working towards something, I have something that's just for me. So, interestingly, going back to school to get my master's to become a counselor was a massive act of self-care for me, even though it technically stretched me more thin in my day-to-day life, but it gave me so much energy and motivation that that act of self-care benefited everyone in my family system. And not even in my family system in my house, but also, the other people that I interact with frequently.
Hmm. And Brittany, I can imagine some parents watching here, they're treading water and doing their best here. Uh, what will be your message to them who are watching the podcast right now?
That is a big question because, again, it's so unique to each person's situation and what will be helpful to them. And I also want to be really mindful not to minimize anyone's situation. Um, because when I'm reflecting on things that have happened to me in the past, it's really easy for me to say, well, I just did something for myself. Okay, but it also took me 3 years of contemplating doing something for myself before I ever did anything for myself. I fully dedicated myself to learning about my children and becoming more attuned, which I don't know if it was the best approach, but I just want to acknowledge that it's easy for me, sort of at this stage of my journey, to be able to reflect on it and sound like calm, cool, collected, like it was no big deal, but it was super challenging. And I just want people to know, like, I see you and you can do this and you
Mhm.
can find ways to hold the both. And I'm treading water and I love my kid. I'm treading water and maybe so there's a metaphor that just came to my mind thinking about treading water where you're juggling balls and some of them are glass and some of them are plastic. So you have all these balls that you're juggling in the air and there's too many. It's not possible to juggle them all. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about picking and choosing, like where you put your energy, what you're choosing to do, even if like leaving the house kind of thing. So say you're having a day where you have so many balls in the air, you have to let the plastic ones drop so that you can juggle the glass ones. You have to make sure that everyone gets fed. You have to make sure that you that your kids feel loved and cared for. And on some days, the plastic ball is cleaning your kitchen or like other tasks that, yes, they're important, but in this stage of life, they're not a glass ball. They may feel like a glass ball, they may be holding up glass balls, but finding ways to let go of the plastic balls is a really important way to sort of keep your head above water. And maybe the treading water is slower pace instead of frantically trying not to drown.
Well, that's a great metaphor. Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you, Brittany. So, Brittany, here in week one of this group here, you went through the intersectionality and then the both ends,
Mm.
and then anything else as a participant to expect in the week number one of the group.
Oh yeah. Well, actually, I'll just quickly mention actually group week 3 was we
Okay.
moved into like systems and power and advocacy fatigue. So that's a
Mm,
big topic all on its own. So that's why I just want to sort of note that that's what we talked about, but I won't totally go into it. But we were
mm,
talking about navigating schools and healthcare and various different
mm.
therapy systems and things that insurance covers or doesn't cover, and how applying for things like disability tax credit, you have to have the perfect wording. Otherwise, it won't be approved, especially for neurodivergence, because it's an invisible disability. Um, and then sort of the invisible labor that comes with all of that and the advocacy fatigue. So, sort of helping people, like having discussions about what identifying the realistic capacity that people have, and also how setting boundaries can help both. They can help practitioners, they can help parents, and they also help kids too. So that sort of giving yourself permission to step back into the uncertainty and sort of redefining what enough means, enough advocacy, enough support, enough learning. And so, and then that allows for more imperfections and being able to recognize misattunements and repairing ruptures in your relationship, whether it's with your clients or with your kids or kids, like adult children, with your parents. It kind of goes all ways.
Hey.
Yeah. And so from there into week 4, we talked about redefining what success and growth is.
Mhm.
Because we sort of, as we were talking earlier about the school system, we sort of have this idea of where everyone should end up. Like there'll be variability in where people end up, but there's sort of a couple of tracks to get there. So, and we think of that as being success. Like success is where you've arrived. But
Mhm.
these are neurotypical benchmarks, and they don't actually work that great for neurotypical folks either. So when we think about growth, we were working on redefining it as like non-linear, or and like it's pretty contextual to each situation. Um, and again, how boundaries are protective as well as connective for
Mm.
families. So yeah, there were a lot of really interesting reflections around that topic, and sort
Mhm.
of how social media can play a big part as well. There's a lot of great information that parents are accessing and trying to help. And there's lots of great professionals out there giving information, but there's a lot of information and a lot of it is not accurate either. Or it's
Oh.
not a well enough explained. Um, so then people sort of take the information and interpret it in a different way than it's intended. So that can lead to a lot of stress for parents and children and everyone as well, because our brains were not designed to take in that much information at all times and learn how to decipher it all.
That's wonderful here, Brittany, with these 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks here. And I write down here in my notes here because for the next episode, I want to ask you more about week 3 and week 4 about how to navigate the systems, especially in the BC government had a recent change in the funding for neurodivergence. And then also I want to ask more about week 4 about the definition of success and also some of the social media help, guidance, and also the misinformation next time.
Yes, that sounds fantastic. Thanks for having me on.
So, Brittany, I'm really happy about today, and we'll talk more about next time.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joseph. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.